So he has worked in marketing and business development for 10 years before learning about Agile and Lean, which was about 5 years ago. Now he helps organizations in technology, marketing, and non-profit arenas implement Agile and Lean principles and practices. He's certified Scrum professional, a master of Open Agile, and he's pursuing a black belt in disciplined Agile delivery. He's currently coaching more than 24 Agile teams in enterprise applications department of a large software company in Silicon Valley. And his main job is that he's a full-time daddy and he stays home and takes care of his kid.
Fantastic.
So, welcome, David.
Brilliant job. I know that, those intros, they always cause us to pile all kinds of facts and things together. I guess as a way of trying to get you to listen to me. Say, yeah, this guy, he knows what he's talking about. So what I actually envisioned doing today is more of an experience report than trying to fill you with a whole bunch of information. Because in the organization that I coach, we conducted an experiment over the last several months with a model called learning circles. And I'll give you a little bit of background about why we did that and what the characteristics of learning circles are. And then the way I envision treating the rest of the session is that we would actually have a learning circle session. And I brought some a workbook. And then we could also, come on up.
Okay. Sorry.
No, you're more than welcome. Great time. Just slide on a chair. I got somebody. This one's next is open and
Okay.
relatively warm. I guess.
Moving to the wrong direction.
So, as far as the slideshow, like the deck, is that going to be made available on the website?
Yes.
Okay. So in the deck, it's got a brief description of what learning organizations are. Many of you will be familiar with the concept of learning organizations from Peter Senge's work, the Fifth Discipline, or a great Wikipedia article on learning organizations. It's just chock full of good information. You can use the slide deck to refresh your memory on that. And beyond that, the structure of learning organizations, of learning circles, this model that I experimented with, the description of that is in the deck too, so we won't spend a lot of time on that. But just to give you a sense of what a learning circle is, and just at least to give you something that you might want to consider playing with in your own organizational context. A learning circle is an alternative model of education that is meant to sort of replace a traditional mode of education. Like, for example, hire a trainer, go sit in a class for 2 days, they tell you all kinds of stuff, and then you go back to your world and try to remember as much as you can and try to put it into place, and every now and then you get kind of stumped by the complexity of the real world. That was my experience largely learning Scrum, and I was embedded in that mode of because of working for certified Scrum trainers, doing a lot of training classes, and then picking up the pieces as a coach, going into organizations and seeing all of their challenges with trying to make theory reality. So the company I'm working for, Autodesk, is where I'm working is their IT department. Their enterprise applications group's got about 25 different teams doing application development for every different business unit, to support a large company. And we had introduced Scrum, whole hog. Everybody, gets training and coaching and access to, process guidance. And for several years, we experimented with Scrum, and we're doing, really good. Lots of good things going on. But there are some limitations to small-scale Scrum, and to try to benefit from strategies that could make us more enterprise aware and more sensitive to kind of the overall needs of an organization, we decided to put an overlay to Scrum called Disciplined Agile Delivery. And the story about how we chose Disciplined Agile Delivery and all that stuff, I'll actually get into in my next talk at just a little plug. Scaling Agile and Disciplined Agile Delivery. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But specifically in what I want to talk about here is what we did to teach people Disciplined Agile Delivery. So the background is you got a whole bunch of people who have got several years, many people with several years of experience applying Scrum to their work and getting incremental benefit and improving and all of those things. But at the same time, okay, now you've got this whole body of experience. What do you do with these people if you want to introduce a new framework? How do you get them to make a pivot? Are you going to, for example, send everybody again to 2-day training classes from somebody who's certified Hujima in discipline after delivery, or introduce or some other scaling framework? And so as their coach, I thought, you know what, I don't want to take them there unnecessarily. So maybe, let's leave the door open for that if it's necessary, if we find that that kind of training is appropriate. But I wanted to experiment with something else, so we went with learning circles. So a learning circle is basically a lot like this. We're all cross-disciplinary, different backgrounds and views. We're sitting in a circle. We have a facilitator. Hey, that's me. Facilitators, in our experience, we rolled out several learning circles, and in each case, eventually we evolved to having sort of rotating facilitator. It just seemed more appropriate, especially when you've got a whole bunch of people who've got experience being Scrum Masters and whatnot. They've developed the skills of facilitation, and so yeah, we rotated facilitating. But a learning circle typically has a facilitator who may be more knowledgeable in the subject, or at least knowledgeable in the skill of facilitation. And their main responsibility is to help the group learn and to explore the concepts and to make sure that all the voices are being heard and brought to the conversation. What else to say about learning circles? Okay, so as far as the structure, what questions do you have about the structure of a learning circle? I mentioned the characteristics of being cross-disciplinary, sitting in a circle, and being facilitated, not led.
Is there a particular size that works best?
That's a good question. We did experiment with a couple of different sizes. We have one learning circle that's about 4 people, and that one seems to be too small, because when 1 or 2 people can't make the meeting, you don't have critical mass to have good learning dynamics. At the same time, we also have a learning circle that we felt was too big. It had about 20 people. It was too big for one reason, logistics. It was hard to find conference rooms that you can book with space for 20 people. Another thing is that if there are people who don't, who aren't the most forthcoming in talking, they may be more reserved or kind of holding back what they want to say. They want the really large group, then they'll get lost. And then there's a tendency to just sort of, okay, I'll multitask, I'll answer my emails because, well, everything I would really have to say is already being said and blah, and then, it's just sort of detract. So I think there is sort of something that is too small and something that's too big. But you'd have to figure out kind of what's the right mix.
And then I guess my next question is the learning circle aligned along Scrum groups, or do you try to tear those Scrum groups apart and the learning circle is a different set of people than the people that are working on your work team?
Yeah, it's a good question. We tried both approaches and hybrids of those. We took basically Scrum teams through a learning circle to learn some of the concepts over the course of several weeks. Mm-hmm. The challenge there was because they'd been sort of acclimated to Scrum in a 2-day Agile session. Mm-hmm. They were used to that kind of model and wanted to have a more intensive setting for learning rather than an hour every week. An hour a week is what they do in their retrospectives, and so it just feels a little bit more like a retrospective than they're there to learn something new. Mm-hmm. So that was our experience with Scrum groups, but you may also have the personalities or the interests. Engineers, in my experience, tend to be more like, okay, well, just tell me what I need to know. And the product owners will be more like, okay, what do you really want and what's going on here? And the Scrum Master is like, but how's everybody feeling about it? And so there's all these different dynamics. So it's trying to figure out what's the right blend of skills. Another thing that emerged was we took people from, for example, people who are named Scrum Masters. So we'd have a learning circle just of Scrum Masters or a circle of just product owners. And in those, the challenge was to introduce learnings that was sufficiently new for the people in the group that it didn't just sort of devolve into a community of practice where everybody could just sort of air their complaints or get resources. Say, okay, well, hey, how do you do this? Well, how do I do that? So, and those things are very important. You know, in when you have a lot of Scrum teams, you need those kind of cross-pollination of ideas. But what distinguishes a community of practice from a learning circle is that a learning circle needs to have the active intention to learn something. And in my experience, another thing that actually really helps is to have some kind of work product that they're working on trying to achieve at the end. So another characteristic of a learning circle that I didn't mention is when the motivation starts to wane, kind of ask, hey, are we done here? It can be a short-lived, organism, whatever you want to call it, a coupling of people for a period of time and say, okay, once we've accomplished our objective of learning something or we've gotten enough that it's not our top priority anymore, well, we can move on, and there's no hard feelings. So something that's short-lived, it can actually be of benefit where you come together for a period of time, learn something, and then move on. And a formal sort of 2-day training kind of style doesn't accommodate for that. Another thing is, those things you have to kind of move a whole bunch of stuff off your calendar, but a 1-hour-a-week session over the course of, say, 10 weeks or a quarter, that's something that you can start to accommodate with your regular routines.
So community of practices generally are like Scrum Masters would form one community practice, the team developers would form one, product owners would form one, and it's like learning for them within that circle. Mm-hmm. So learning circle is for everyone, like Scrum Masters, team, and everyone together. Or
yeah, the best learning circles, the ones that seemed to be most alive and to thrive were ones that had sort of a mix of different backgrounds and skills and roles that they played. And what we did, over the course of the last several months was we took a couple of different approaches to the education piece. One, we had some learning circles developing their own materials. So each week, somebody would come and make a presentation about some core discipline agile delivery concept. So for example, we have 1 week where one person came to present on what does it mean to have enterprise awareness, or what does it mean, we had somebody else to talk about the roles and responsibilities in discipline agile delivery. Another thing that we did, and this is the packet that I brought, is with the intention of trying to give people some curriculum that they could just sink their teeth into. I sort of worked on creating some curriculum and then iterated on it every week. So I would give the curriculum or give a couple of sections of a workbook. We would go through it and then take feedback, and then I'd quickly change it or adjust something so that the next learning circle, and that was a bit complicated in my experience. That was maybe a bit of overkill, but okay, so I learned from it. So I changed up some of it and introduced a couple of other concepts, but the basic structure of the learning circle workbook is here.
Do you have rules of engagement for learning circles? Do you set rules of engagement like you do for Scrum teams?
Yes, thank you for asking about
Same
that.
with like learning goals. How do you decide what the learning goals are? Or does the group decide?
Objectives. Yeah.
So as far as rules of engagement go, they were sort of, we established that everybody's voice is equal and that we were supposed to listen to all the suggestions and comments that anybody made. Mm-hmm. That we're supposed to encourage a clash of differing opinions so that new ideas can come out. So we established those ground rules in the first session, and usually because I was kicking off the learning circles and serving as kind of the initial facilitator, we just had our first session was discussing ground rules, rules of engagement, what our frequency of meeting, how we were going to go about it. Now, as far as the goals of learning, we left that kind of open because the trick in this particular instance, the trick was we didn't know what we didn't know. So like for example, with Scrum, you can bust out a book, you can read it, you can go, okay, or like the Scrum guide, you can read the Scrum primer, something. It's a short synopsis in a couple of dozen pages, all of the things about Scrum that you need to learn. But Disciplined Agile Delivery is different because it's a hybrid Agile framework. It's goals driven. It's much more, in a way, nebulous. There's a lot more nuance to it. And so trying to figure out what were the characteristics of Disciplined Agile Delivery that we needed to bring into our organization and what we needed to learn more about needed to be organic and undeclared up front. Another thing was, honestly, as a coach, I didn't know Disciplined Agile Delivery. I mean, the background of it, I said I was going to save it for later, but the background of it was that the manager basically said, we need to do something to try and harness what we've done with Scrum, but try to also achieve a level of cohesion across the organization. So what are we going to do? And so I went and started, examining scaling frameworks, and Disciplined Agile Delivery seemed to be the best fit for this particular situation. It doesn't mean that SAFe or LESS or Real Agility or any of the other programs out there are not as good or not appropriate. They just weren't right for this particular situation. So we didn't know, and I didn't know as a coach, how to tell people, hey, this is the part of DAD that you should know, and this is the part of DAD that you can skip, you can ignore that. So I didn't want to shortcut it for them. So the learning goals, we tried to leave open initially. We've learned since then that there are some things that we can shortcut, and so for Learning Circles 2.0 that we're on right now, they've got a much more streamlined path. But this workbook is essentially what came out of 1.0. And it would be worthwhile if you guys want to get into it. We could just treat this like a learning circle. So what we'll do is basically we'll read through the information, and because we and then I can guide you on the exercises and the data information after that.
Do you use retrospectives? Or,
It's sort of baked in here.
Okay, that's what I thought, yeah.
I can explain a little more detail when we get to that part of the exercise.
Right.
Would anybody be willing to volunteer and read? We'll just share like a paragraph at a time.
I can start. You want me to just read from here?
Just read the first paragraph.
Okay. Welcome to the Lean-Agile Learning Circle. A learning circle is a well-known method of education. Some may say it goes as far back as the discovery of fire. A group of motivated individuals come together on a regular basis to explore a topic of common interest. Generally, there is a more experienced person who acts as a facilitator, and the members of the learning circle are participants. However, a key principle of learning circles is that all participants are collaborators in a reciprocal process in which everyone learns and contributes.
Any questions or thoughts about that before we move on? Basically what we've been talking about.
He already said it, so. He already said it, so.
Next paragraph?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Effective learning usually requires more than simple taking a training class or reading the concepts in a book. One must put the concepts into action and then reflect on and learn from the results in order to improve. In the following sections, you will find a short explanation of the Lean Agile concept, followed by lines for capturing a plan of action, your reflections, and what you learned. This is meant to help your learning circle explore the concepts in a dynamic manner.
Questions about that? This is like if you were to take this into your organization, this is instructions for your learning circle itself. So it's sort of helping to lead towards that. Who could read next? Thank you.
The diagram describes a model of systematic learning that we'll use throughout the workbook. describes 4 steps and 4 interconnected capacities that pivot around guidance. Guidance is the act of assisting an individual, team, or organization to reach a destination by accompanying, giving directions, or supplying advice. For individuals, teams, and organizations, guidance is critical to be able to progress in the development of knowledge, skills, and capacities. Guidance can be applied to all 4 steps and all 4 capacities.
So take a moment and fill out fill in the blanks. Does everybody have a pen?
Yes.
So when you're all done with the exercise portion, just give me a nod and we'll check the answers together. We'll do the next part together, just for instruction purposes. So I know this is not enough time for everyone, and normally in a learning circle we make sure that we give everybody enough time, but I'm going to move us forward just because of the nature of the talk. But we'll check these answers together, just to ensure that we have a common understanding. So think you were the last one to read, so why don't you answer what's in number 1? What's the first step? And can you read the description?
Sure. Action, carrying out the plans you have created.
Anybody get anything different? What's number 2?
Discovering something new, search as insight, skills, relationships, structures, failure or change in all the things about things, learning.
What do you all think about that? Anybody get anything different?
I thought that should be the first
That should be
step.
the first step. So do you mean that in the first blank you put reflect, you put learning,
Yeah, discovering something new.
discovering something new. So is this the description of learning? You agree?
At first I had reflection, because I think that when I reflect, I tend to do a lot of the things that's in that box.
I think the word insight leads to that.
Yeah.
I had learning for number 2.
Some seem like they could have multi to me, but I think that reflection fits it best.
Yeah, I like learning for that. I wrote down reflection, but you've
I had both.
actually got me to rethink how I worded that exercise. So yeah, that's I think that one should be learning. Particularly the difference is with reflection is gathering information or observations.
And for me, it was the pausing too.
Yeah.
Reflection to me
Yeah.
was that you actually have intent to stop and take a look at what's going on.
And well, if we are open for the first one, if any carry out the plans we have created, I mean, of course it's action, but you know, it's kind of the planning as well, because you do a lot of plans. So choosing a course of action, for me it was like the course of action based on our insight and past experience. It was kind of an action. But, we'll see. It's maybe depend of the culture you're coming from.
Yeah. Some of them seem to have many elements to me. So
Yeah,
it seemed like
but
they
I
were-
like that. I put it that there.
This is the right kind of conversation.
Yeah.
What are the 4 capacities that are described in the model?
May I ask a question real
Sure,
fast?
of course.
Are the numbers meant to be sequential?
That's a good question. No, they're not.
Okay.
Well, there's a bigger description of this model in the Open Agile primer, where this comes from, by the way. And in Open Agile, they use this model where they call it systematic learning. And particularly, they point out that systematic learning is an organic process, and that all of these things feed and support each other. And so, it's not linear. 1, 2, or sequential. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
So good question. Doesn't mean you have to start with action, or you can start with anything.
Okay.
Other questions? Cool. In that case, Stacy, can you tell us what you got for the first blank?
For the capacities, so having a desire and willingness to act even in the face of uncertainty is courage.
Anybody else get anything different?
I at first put that as search.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I probably have to be more careful when I word these things. Because I do have like multiple meetings.
These were easy to match to me.
Yeah. But there is some overlap somewhat between courage and search.
I think the nuance of acting, or the willingness to act, is what courage.
Yeah, but to me, when I search, I act. So
Right.
that's why I actually
Yeah.
put that as first, because it was an action for me.
That's interesting.
And in a way, searching is acting.
Mhm.
So I put search for the second one, finding new solutions through good judgment, wisdom, and yeah, this
What is it that search supports? So this would be the notion that upon reflection, which is okay, you pause to gather data and observations, you have to find new solutions by discerning patterns, I guess, and then use that to support learning, which is making a change to how we think or act or something. So this is meant to show that there's a relationship between them. What did you get for number 3?
Number 3, I had detachment, being objective and open to new ideas.
Anybody get anything different? And for number 4, I put love of the work as having a sense of purpose, vision, and passion.
Straightforward.
So at this point in the learning circle, what we would do is we would make a plan for how to apply this concept. So we've received some guidance, which is an examination of a concept about systematic learning and a model of learning, which has got 4 capacities and 4 steps and interrelation, all this stuff. So we have a concept. We probably need to talk about it more so that we can, fully understand it as a group. But then the next step would be creating an action plan. And so the next in the workbook is some blanks for how you would intend to apply that concept in the next week. In this particular case, like this is assuming we were going to meet every week. Our recurrence may change. It just depends on how we decided to structure our learning circle. And then this assumes that we're part of a dynamic learning process. So over the course of the next week, while you're carrying out your plan, you're actually also recording any data or observations. In Scrum, we do this with retrospectives at the end of the sprint. And the longer the sprint, the harder it is to record all of the data and information that occurs. So we encourage participants to record information as they see it. And then the next part is, and what we did with one learning circle was we started the learning circle by reflecting on the data. So we'd say, okay, before we get into learning the next concept, let's reflect on the data that you gathered. And usually it would be a trigger for people to write down a bunch of things because they didn't have time during the last week to record all their observations. So they say, okay, let's take the first 5 minutes to record the observations from the last week. Now let's reflect on that as a group. Let's talk about it. So that's the way we would do it. And that seemed to be a pretty good approach. And then learning is often harder to discern from reflection because what happens with learning is you have to intend to put the changes or the reflections or observations into place once again. So it almost implies that you have another cycle of learning about that initial concept. So it's like it almost takes a couple of weeks to ensure that you're putting some learning or some change into place. Because you've got the initial plan based on your initial understanding, then you've got your reflections, and then your second level of understanding based on the reflections, and potentially just infinitely depends on the concept. But anyway, this is the basic rhythm that we would go through. And with Disciplined Agile Delivery, it was like the concept of being enterprise aware. What are some takeaways for how do we be enterprise aware? So like one person would say, well, as a solution architect, I need to be more enterprise aware by when we do this Salesforce solution, I need to leverage enterprise assets, or something like that. And then as they would go through the course of their work, they would record things that happened. So, I didn't make more copies of this page, but this is the basic rhythm, which would follow each of these sessions.
Just a small question.
Of course.
When you say plan, we can apply this concept. The concept of bringing up this learning circle, right, within a group. We are cross-functional. How do you determine the themes of learning you will have? Because probably most of us will have different
Like, for example, here I've got systematic learning, daily stand-up,
Yeah, exactly.
card wall, prioritization.
Yeah,
Okay, so
exactly.
prioritization may be relevant to some people, but maybe more relevant to product owners or, I
Do
mean,
you do a backlog of teams and then you vote and then you explore and then you take action, or?
I'll be honest, in our case, what I was doing as the coach was seeding these things and saying, these are the kind of things that I think you should explore. But that being said, like, I didn't add Learning Circle until quite far along.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like, and also, actually, and as a result of that, this pattern of creating a plan, gathering data, reflecting and learning, I sort of had a notion about that each session we would come in and talk about what happened last week and what are we going to do differently this week. Kind of like the 3 questions from Scrum: what did I do yesterday, what am I going to do today?
Yeah.
But that didn't seem sufficient for triggering learning. Because even in like your daily Scrum, like, how often do you say, okay, what did you learn yesterday? And what did I learn? I was busy. I was heads down coding. I was doing this stuff. But what did I learn while I was doing it? Well, actually, I learned a whole lot. I just didn't like talk about it, or I didn't measure it or share it with anybody.
Yeah.
So that the trigger for us was like about halfway through one of the learning circles. I was like, you know what? We need to look a little bit more at the concept of learning itself. And so we brought the learning circle in, and then I had another learning circle start up just a couple of weeks ago. And so then when we started that one, we looked at learning circle first. But then later on, like I mentioned, we've got a whole bunch of Scrum teams. They've been running for many sprints. Almost everybody is doing card walls. So card wall was something I sprinkled in for you because, but most of the teams, even going back to this, they would understand like how they're benefiting from a card wall, but the why it's there. Like, where did that come from? Well, I never read card wall when I read the Scrum guide. Well, that's not good. But making work visible is certainly a valuable principle, and it's something that almost everybody does. And or they use some tool. But anyway, this is sort of a summary or a synopsis of the nuts and bolts of what a card wall is. And so then we would investigate. In fact, why don't we do that? I mean, we have a few more minutes.
So you're basically using Scrum practices then to facilitate your learning circles.
Yeah, well, in a way, Scrum practices facilitate learning at a higher level anyway.
Right, yeah.
Right? You've heard the cold cycle is kind of this model that you have to actually experience what you're learning in order to learn it, and then you can do something to change. And then, so I think, yeah, in a way, we are applying Scrum to learn Scrum, or we're applying a learning framework to learn.
Right.
And a learning circle is respectful of this need to become a learning organization. It's a part of learning Agile or Lean or anything. For practice sake, do you want to look at card wall, self-organizing team, prioritization? Does any of those sound interesting or? Say again?
Card wall.
Card wall? I heard self-organization and card wall. Any other votes? Any other preferences? We might even have time to go through both. So why don't we look at, let's look at card wall first, and then we'll look at self-organization. I don't know where we left off, so who can read next?
I think it's back to your left.
Oh, okay.
It's me again?
Yeah.
Okay. Visualizing the workflow is a powerful practice for optimizing the flow of work. A simple approach is to display the workflow on a wall with sticky notes or cards for each work item. This is commonly referred to as a card wall or an information radiator because it radiates information. It's to you.
Yeah, an information radiator is a display posted in a place where people can see it as they work or walk by. It shows readers information they care about without having to ask anyone a question. This means more communication, fewer interruptions. A good radiator includes large and easy, visible to the casual, interested observer. It is understood at a glance, changes periodically, so it's worth visiting. It is easy to keep up to date.
Typically, it is on paper, posted in the team room or in the hallway. In a few exceptional circumstances, it is on a web page that people refer to frequently. Unusual examples of information radiators include a real traffic light, a colored orb, and a computer monitor hung outside a cubicle's partition in the hallway.
I would just point out that in this particular case, I was in sort of a rush to get a really good description, and so I went to Alistair's book and said, hey, there's a good description, let's just put that in there. So as coaches, when you're trying to seed information or good guidance, why invent your own whenever there's really incredible people who have written this stuff before? So turn people to the source, to the source. And in this case, Alistair summed it up nicely. This is a picture for one of my teams, mid-sprint. It was crazy times. Yeah, what you don't see is like what's on the wall around the corner, which is like the way they were doing sort of a scrum plannings, where they had a bunch of teams with thematic work with green yarn attaching the work across dependencies. It was insane. Spanned multiple sprints and multiple teams. It was very, very complicated. But at the same time, visually, you can see what's going on right there in front of you.
For teams that are distributed, does anybody have thoughts about would this work well to have everybody face to face, or is this something, if you're really focusing on a team, to be able to do with a whole team that's spread all over the place? What do you guys think?
I would say ideally teams are co-located according to Scrum principles,
Right,
but the reality is that they're not. So using a blend of software tools, in fact I'm writing a proposal on that one also. You have to just use a blended approach of software tools.
No, I'm just talking about the learning circles.
What would you
Just in general.
For learning circles in general, then you could just use the same thing, different web tools or,
Right, but has anybody had experience is one more effective if the teams are distributed to create smaller learning circles in the specific geographic locations?
What we do have is we use the community of practices a lot, where you can go there, see the different discussion ongoing, and also interact and force even some video conference within this community of practice, and then gather people together. Because what happened is that the face-to-face gave us energy, and then we say, oh wow, yes, I'll do that. And when we go back to our own organization, then you can still, so you still need face-to-face for learning specific items, but we do have this community of practice where you have regular meeting on a monthly basis or whatever, and that you can refer to, right? Oh, I see this nice things to read, and I spread it out through the community, right? So,
blended model.
Yeah, so we do that. The learning circle, we love that. We do a lot book report as well, where people say, okay, let's read this leadership in Agile, and then chapter by chapter we ask people to read, and then you share the reflection and things like that, and it gives people the incentive, because if you want to be part of that, you need to have read before, so it also gives an incentive. So I have different, that's why I was looking to which kind of, if you had teams or whatever. Of course, within the development teams, because we're mainly change agent or coaches, you need to be ahead of your development teams. But from a development teams, you should encourage this learning circle. But this, when people feel confident within the practices, then they will say, oh, we need to learn more on this, and how do we do craft in software, or can we be more agile in deliveries, and then you have this specific learning. So.
We had a couple of learning circles work on just learning the discipline agile delivery by reading the book. It's a 500-page book. It's a lot to get through. What we found was once the people in the learning circle learned what they wanted to learn, it was hard to maintain momentum. Even if they weren't through the book. So if a group, for example, if we had a group of product owners, and the way the book is structured, it goes introduction, then inception phase, which is largely about preparing for your project. And then it goes into construction, which is all about running, and a lot of like what we do in Scrum. So once the product owners were through the inception part of the book, they were like, I think I've gotten all the stuff I need to learn, and so it was really hard to get them to come back to the learning cycle. It was kind of interesting observation, because of course the product owner is involved throughout the life cycle. But anyway, it's a challenge. We'll see what happens. But another challenge with reading the book or learning something for the sake of learning something was a lot of the conversation would be about, hey, how do we do that here? Oh, and it would always be kind of translating it back. And on occasion, it would be like, oh, I really don't like that concept. I hope we don't do it. Or I really like that, but we'll never do that. We need to get everybody on board to make this policy change and all kinds of things. So it wasn't always a productive conversation about just trying to learn what was in the book itself. So in those occasions, we would have to rely on our rules of engagement. We're here to learn for the sake of learning this material, and let's not get distracted too much or whatever. Anything else about Cardwall? At this point in a learning circle, in a session, we would basically turn back to this basic pattern. Write down a plan of how you're going to put this into action over the next week. Just go buy a whole bunch of blue tape for the wall. Ask facilities to designate a wall that doesn't have motivational posters on it, so that we can, or give space in the closet so that I can hide all the motivational posters and put sticky notes up on the wall. And then the following week, we would reflect on it, reflect on the data that came as a result of putting that plan into place. Does anybody else want to talk about Cardwall before we look at self-organizing team? We've got just a few more minutes left. So let's read what self-organizing teams is. I forget where we left off, so you've already volunteered.
I read the first chapter. Build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. It's principle behind the manifesto, Agile Manifesto number 5.
The best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. Principles behind Agile Manifesto number 11.
In a traditional work setting, there is a manager who oversees a group of people with specific growth conditions. There is one way you report your relationship. If you can imagine the pyramid-shaped org chart, you have got the basics.
Scrum teams operate on the principle of self-organization. In such a setting, the members of the team coordinate the tasks among themselves. They volunteer for tasks and hold each other accountable for completing the work. The manager, who is not necessarily on the team, is responsible for giving the team the support they need to do the work. The trust invested in the team has a huge payoff for the individual team members and the organization in terms of productivity and satisfaction.
Have you guys had any experiences with encountering this sort of dichotomy in your work environment?
I think with transformation, sometimes getting people to get invested to do the work, because a lot of times people are over allocated, so that's some of the challenges that I've seen in the transformation, is getting it to the team approach where people are used to doing it more in a sort of a group top down. So when you just ask people to volunteer without like any motivation in there, it's sort of, usually people say, well, I'm just over allocated or something like that, so you have to put like I'm finding that a reward structure kind of, put into place, like a newsletter was saying, hey, so-and-so did this, and give them some motivation of like either a praise or, free movie tickets or something like that. We'll get people snowballing, because then they'll boast about sort of what they did, but that's just the experience I've had. I don't know. I'd be interested in hearing anybody else's.
I find the problem is twofold, right? One is leaders are used to managing by command and control, and the teams are used to be
Told
led
what to do.
by command and control. So there's a bit of a void. One thing that did, I think, offer some guidance and help is they talk about decision authority boards, where you kind of really step by step decide, well, where would you want to be, and then evolve towards there in a very step-by-step fashion based on where you're at right now. That's covered in, I actually don't like the whole book, but that part I did like is Management 3.0 by Jorgen and Heather.
One of the things that you can do with this structure of learning circles is when you have learning circles sort of alive and working, operating in the organization, when you have something that you need people to understand, or you want to get some feedback or some insight about the implications of it, given that each learning circle is actually going to operate kind of in their own way, in their own have their own dynamics that emerge over time, you can sort of drop in this kind of guidance. You can say, okay, well, here's something I want to ask you to explore as a learning circle. Can you evaluate this and see what would be the implications, or could you explore this, or is it worth picking up? And you could do things like pull segments out of books, or we had was it Jurgen? Did he do the Scrum Product Owner in a Nutshell video? No, that was Nyberg. That was Henrik Nyberg. Yeah. So, but we watched that in one of the learning circles, and people had this whole big conversation about the role of product owner and how do we empower them to say no, and all of this kind of stuff. And, it spawned a very, very interesting conversation. And so anyway, I want to leave you with this as a potential construct that you can use in your own transformations. We're trying to imbue learning into the culture of organizations, and this is something that you can try. Learning circles are not a new thing. I didn't invent them. It's something that people have been doing forever, like sitting around the campfire learning the latest techniques for catching trout or whatever. But I think that there is potential that in organizations where there is a culture of learning, that this model could respectfully replace the traditional mode of education, and also make the learning deeper, because it's purely organic and thrives based on the membership and the contributions of people. Anyhow, thanks for letting me explore the subject with you. I don't want to stand between you and your lunch, but I also understand there's a bit of a retrospective thing on the wall there. Do you have any other instructions for us before we?
No, that's it. The retrospective, I would request everyone, there's dot stickies there. You could vote on that, and that's it.
And if you want to reach out to me, my contact information is on the front here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. To, out of that.